Will you be pulling up the front screen, Josh?
Yes, let me go ahead and share my screen. I think we're live now, so welcome everybody. Looks like the attendees list is populating, so that's good.
Got it, Josh? Okay. Well, welcome. Hopefully we've got about 30 some people here right now. Hopefully we'll have a few more joining us today for our first town hall for the historic Rippavilla Master Plan event. My name is Mary Roskilly. I'm with Tuck-Hinton Architects, and our firm was selected back in March, right before all this virus stuff kicked in. And we started kicking off this master plan on behalf of the city to study the Rippavilla property and come up with some recommendations for the future of the almost 100-acre site. On the call with us tonight, and as part of our team, not all the members are here tonight, but we do have members of our team. Carolyn Tate, she deals primarily with archiving and museum services, spent quite a lot of time at the Country Music Hall of Fame prior to retiring from that and starting out doing kind of her own special projects. So she's working with us on this team to help kind of look at the story of Rippavilla. Phil Thomason is a preservation consultant that we're working with to look at the property and the buildings to determine what's best to preserve, what's the story behind it, how do we make sure that we protect and preserve the assets that they have at the site. Pillars Development is a group that we're working with. We've got a couple members from Pillars Development on the call with us tonight, looking at market use, market assessment, and Gary Vogren with Kaiser Vogren Landscape, also part of our team. And then we also have Volkert Engineering and Rock City, who are part of our team, really holistically looking at this property. So what our team wanted to do tonight, first if I give you kind of a quick overview, we're gonna do about a 20-minute presentation running through some information on Rippavilla. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go over some questions that we're going to be putting out in a public survey that we want to get as much input as possible from you guys here tonight. And then also as feedback on the survey that we'll put out and use that information going forward to guide our master plan. So since we are virtual here tonight, we're trying to manage this, make sure, since we can't see your faces in the room, we want you guys to go ahead, if you've got questions during the presentation, to use the Q&A box that you see on the screen. We've got Paige from our office is kind of monitoring that, and we'll help field those questions once we get through the presentation. And then if you just have general comments, go ahead and just put that in the chat box if it's just a comment you want and it's not really a question there. So if I will, Josh, go ahead and go to the next slide on here. So as I mentioned, our firm was hired in middle of March, and we started really working on this project the beginning of April when we got underway. And our team was doing a lot of research kind of to understand the site and the property. And I'm assuming a lot of people that are on this call understand the significance of Rippavilla. I'm going to read along on this. I'm not going to read every word on here, but the fact that Rippavilla does really hold an important historical and cultural, it's really one of those assets in the city of Spring Hill that is, it's just amazing. The more we get into the story and the history, it's just a wonderful asset to have in your community and really to share nationwide. If we go back to 1811, the Chairs family purchased the property, and then about 1851, they started building the big mansion that you see where most of the tours take place right now. And probably most people are familiar with that aspect, having been there for events or driving by or actually going on tours. But there's a lot more to this property. This is almost a 100-acre property. And Josh from our office is going to be going through a series of diagrams and drawings that we've been using to capture the information about the site and really understand the importance and the history of what has happened on this property. So there's many, there's mansions and there's the barns, slave cemeteries. You have the battlefield for the Spring Hill battlefield, which was the precursor to the Battle of Franklin, some really important battles in the Civil War. And as I mentioned, we've had the tours today. There are some places where you can go walking and hiking on the property and see a series of outbuildings that have historic significance. And I think what we're looking to do is make sure that we figure out how to really take those assets and make those really shine on the property and give Rippavilla in the city the means by which they can continue this really in perpetuity. The Rippavilla is owned and maintained by the city of Spring Hill. Thus, the city is the group that hired us, and we're working on behalf of the city. And one of the next steps, go ahead, Josh, to the next slide. When we started this project, one of the key things from the story of Rippavilla, if you look at the different kind of eras of time from 1850 to 1958, there's kind of 4 different storylines that are important from, if you start back with building the plantation. First, we had war, the Civil War and Reconstruction, some importance of the agricultural industry. And then as we enter the modern age, how the property and the house and the plantation transferred and just really evolved over time. So we were sort of given that as our focus, that a little bit more than 100-year period that we wanted from a historic standpoint to focus on. And then also the distinct, what we call cultural contributions, the unique architecture of Rippavilla, the place in the Civil War history, the lives and contributions of those enslaved at Rippavilla, and Rippavilla's place in agricultural history of the United States. So again, that was a framework that was set for us at the beginning of sort of, we need to make sure that we come out understanding and giving guidance on how to best tell those stories, reinforce those stories. And so what we did sort of in our first phase, the kickoff and use assessment that you see our timeline down at the bottom, we did a lot of information gathering. Josh will go through a lot of those maps and drawings on the site to evaluate the content that we are dealing with, the existing content. But part of our task also was to look at not just the historic aspects in the story and the history we want to preserve. All those things are very expensive. Anybody who's ever been part of a museum or tried to renovate an old house or keep things up, it is expensive to do that. And I think one of the main goals also is to try to figure out how Rippavilla can become more self-sustaining and have complementary uses that help to bring funding in and support the activities that need to help to preserve the mansion and the property. So our group is looking at how do we preserve the story, how do we tell the story the best and make sure we understand the story, dig into it to really get all the facts, and then look at what can we do with it that helps reinforce the story or that is complementary, that could help bring in some money for the property, for the city, for Rippavilla to keep the property up. So we're now in the second phase we call the visioning phase, which is where we're here tonight with you and want to gather. We've kind of gathered information, talking to a lot of individuals and entities in town, but this is the part where we have our town hall where we're looking for the public to give us feedback and teach us things we haven't learned just doing research and pulling together a bunch of information to help give us guidance and facts to work with as we go to the next phase, which we call concept development. We're gonna have a town hall for that. And that's where we're gonna come back with some ideas from what we heard from you, what we've heard from Rippavilla and some of the groups we've been interviewing already, and really show you some ideas on how we think we could make the best use of the assets that are out there at the property. We're gonna have another town hall meeting with you as we refine this in the final concept phase. And then finally, we'll kind of finish it up and with the final recommendations with input from a lot of people in the community and try to give Rippavilla and the city the best framework for taking Rippavilla to the next century. So Josh, if you want to share some of what we've been doing the first couple months, April through June primarily, we were doing a lot of information gathering, and Josh will share some diagrams with you right now.
Okay, just had to unmute myself. So I think just a lot of these next few slides that I'll be going through have a lot to do with just familiarizing everybody with the location and the buildings and grounds of Rippavilla. This meeting is being recorded so that we can post it on the city's website following this. And so we just want to make sure to be able to give everybody the best context of around Rippavilla. And so some of you may already know, everything about what I'm about to share in these diagrams, but just bear with me for the sake of those that may not be as familiar. On this first regional site plan, you'll see the Rippavilla property highlighted in green, located near where Saturn Parkway terminates into Highway 31. This is just a regional site context of some of the more significant properties around it and other historical or community interest spots that are in its surroundings. And then zooming in a bit and looking at current zoning of the property and what the neighboring properties represent. So currently Rippavilla's zone is public recreation. Its neighboring properties include Southern Springs neighborhood just immediately to the east. You've got the historic battlefield owned by the Civil War Trust just to the north. Then the General Motors production facility to the west across Highway 31. And then the larger property to its immediate south is owned by the Murray County Industrial Development Board. As we start to look closer at the property itself, we've kind of broken up the property into, according to a conservation easement that's controlled by the Tennessee Land Trust, and it more relates to what can and can't be built or programmed on the property, and specifically has these two building envelopes, which they refer to as building envelope A and building envelope B, but those are those brownish shaded areas to the front and rear of the property. And as we zoom in, these next couple slides are just helpful visuals in referring to them, later on in question and answer, and just helping others be more familiar with the build structures and what's referred to as what. So you have the plantation, the mansion house at the front of the property, fronting Highway 31, the old garage building that kind of frames out the courtyard that probably many are familiar with. And of course, Rayburn Amphitheater over here to the southwest of the mansion. And the 1855 stock barn is kind of immediately behind the mansion, and the Freedman School adjacent to that, which was not original to the site, but still has historical significance. And then further out, the southern end of that building envelope is the Hickard Center, which is a more modern construction. It doesn't really contribute historically to the property, but allows for some of those other programmed event activities and kind of community meetings currently. And then there's just a number of other accessory buildings that you'll find throughout the property. But then moving back towards envelope B, this is more central to some of the agricultural buildings that were built in the early 1900s at the rear of the property. And specifically here you have the mule barn or the event barn and a older farm shop which still remain. And then as you move south from here, there's a historic tenant house and which housed the laborers that were on site. And historically, there and likely were more slave cabins further to the south that housed the labor on the property. And then as you move further, there's the Chairs Family Cemetery and the Cemetery for Unknown Souls. And again, even more remote on the property is a replica of the Brown Stand, which was served as an inn for travelers a very long time ago. And moving beyond the built environment, we also looked at just generally the topography and drainage on site. You can see the higher elevations in yellow here and lower in green. This is probably more significant if the topography was more dramatic, but a lot of the property site is relatively flat, so this comes into play more when we're considering different programmed activities, or even where it may be good areas to build a new structure if that is a recommendation. And then from there, we also looked at different site character areas and different site elements. And so we've broken up, kind of diagrammed the property out into kind of 3 character zones. We've got the built environment and maintained landscape, which is more towards the front of the property. And then the farming and agricultural landscape, which serves as that center piece that's in the kind of yellowish tone. And then the more densely wooded and natural environment, which is the green shaded area, the darker green. Again, those kind of play into what kind of programmed activities are best suited for each zone. And in addition to this, overlaid are different site elements. So of course in blue is our streams that run through the property. And then we also have overlaid the different circulation paths, whether it's vehicular circulation or walking trails. And sometimes it's a combination of both. And then also future planned city trailheads and greenways. There are this green dot and then the green dashed line. And then finally, there's a bike route planned along US 31 on the western edge of the property. And again, just getting into where we have some limitations or restrictions. Of course, the building envelopes are the only locations we can build new structures. And then you have the zoning setbacks here in magenta, which is just a setback from the edge of the property boundary, which again limits where built structures can be added. And in yellow here, you have wetland and stream buffers. Again, even a lot of site features would need to stay outside of those buffers. And finally, just on site influences here, we took a stab at diagramming some of the more historical influences on the property. And so you see some of the main troop movements from the Civil War, the battle lines from the Battle of Spring Hill, and then also Jackson's military road, which came through the rear of the property, which served a number of purposes over the years. And then towards that more where the mule barn is and the farm shop, there was a much larger agricultural campus that was developed by P.D. Houston when his family owned or at least part of the property. And then you can see there were quite a number of buildings that existed up through the I think 1970s, but only a few remain today. And again, this is helpful in helping to influence where different parts of the Rippavilla story could be appropriate to tell on the property. And then finally, in these site diagrams, we've got two pages one from the front of the property and one from the rear that focus more on what are the views of the landscape and kind of in and out of the property, because that is such an asset to the campus. And again, for those that aren't able to visit or not as familiar, just kind of helping them to get a sense of all that there is to experience. And so, that was towards the front of the property, and then here back kind of at the rear where you do have some of the more natural features, natural landscapes, and then also, some opportunity to talk about where, where buffers may want to be added to kind of keep some of those views more natural, like where you're able to kind of get views into more contemporary development, like Southern Springs neighborhood. And again, these are probably something that you could spend more time digesting and looking over. And so the slides, in addition to the recording, will be available on the city website following this. You'll have more time to kind of spend looking at these boards. And so, trying to establish that context for the property, and then the main purpose of tonight is to introduce everybody to an online survey that's going to be made available during this meeting, and will be kept open through the end of next week. But its purpose is really to engage with the stakeholders of Rippavilla and Spring Hill residents. And what we're trying to do is build ideas for the success, as Mary mentioned at the beginning of this, about the future development of the campus. So, that could mean any changes to the built environment or landscape of grounds, but it's also ideas for types of programming and events that could best support those ideas of success. And so the online survey consists of a number of questions, and some of them are kind of front-end demographic questions, which will help us in kind of evaluating things. But so just bear with the survey a little bit on the front end, but there's 4 primary questions that we're looking for feedback on these categories that are towards the end of the survey. And they really focus on these next 4 slides are the content of those 4 questions. And they focus first on, of the current programming and events that occur at Rippavilla, what's really going to make you personally more likely to visit. And so this lists a number of the current offerings that are available on site. Some range from regular daily programming to events and rentals, and then a number of them are kind of one-time yearly annual events that happen, or seasonal events. So I think you're gathering your input on even what you're aware of currently as offerings on the property is going to be useful input for us. And then, beyond what's currently being offered in terms of programming, we've listed a number of ideas here, but what other types of programming or events might make you more likely to visit the property? And those range from...
Okay, I'm in. This is...
Hey, Mary. Sorry. Mary Kerr has joined us. Welcome.
Yeah, sorry. I had some a little bit of difficulty, but I am here.
Great. I'm glad you're here. We are currently going through some of the survey questions, and we're close to getting to the Q&A session here in the next, probably in the next 5 minutes. So
perfect.
And there is a question that just popped up on here. So yes, if we'll be, I think, wrapping this up in the next 5 minutes and opening it up for Q&A. Everybody's welcome to use the Q&A, the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen to go ahead and insert questions, and they'll get logged in there and not lost, and we can answer them when we get to that part of the presentation or the part of the program. But we'll have ample time for Q&A. So going back to this, again, these are a combination of different events and programming, seasonal events or annual events that could happen, and even just, some ideas of just maintaining open space, whether it's for a recreational activity or just the purpose, the beauty of the landscape and being able to observe it. And the third primary question we have in there is about additions specifically to the built environment, the structures, the existing structures, and possibly new structures. Again, the current primary structures on the site include the mansion, the 1855 stock barn, tenant house, the Freedman School, the brownstand replica, and mule barn, and the cemeteries are also a kind of a built piece to it. So here, there's a number of, on the front end, upgrades that I think could and should be considered for the existing buildings, and how to make those more friendly to tours and different types of programming. But then also some ideas around, could new structures serve some of those purposes, and how new structures could also contribute to a complementary use, something that could be contribute more to revenue generating activities, but also tie, whether it's I don't know, the winery or the distillery, those could have ties to an agricultural use in the past, and there's also some evidence from other case studies we've looked at that show that something in that in these realms could be successful from a revenue generated standpoint, in addition to telling the story. And then the final question deals more with the additions or modifications to the landscape and grounds. And these are much more obviously site features. And again, all of these ideas are kind of idea starters. And so we're also looking for people on all these questions. This other category is an opportunity to add anything that we may not have thought of to this list, and get those additional thoughts out there. I will say that with some of these ideas, there are concerns with the access to the grounds, and archaeology concerns with artifacts, Civil War artifacts, or just historical artifacts that may still be contained on the property. And so there's always I guess a balance to consider there, but there's some of the more some of the activities that have been more destructive to the grounds in the past, I think, have generally been discouraged or not as actively included on our end up to this point. So at this point, we would open it up to a question and answer period. I just want to reiterate that a lot of this is going to be useful for our market consultant, helping to make comparisons to other similar properties, and helping to make recommendations for Rippavilla in particular.
So, Josh, I see we've got there's a couple comments and questions up here. Let me make a general comment, and then we may turn some of these over to our consultants. I see that the Murray County High School kids made a live presentation to BOMA on here, asking for support to basically turn the barn into a music venue or theater. I think these are the exact comments that we're looking for, in that if we don't have it listed on the survey, if there is that comment that says other, and you have another thing that you're passionate about or think would be a good fit for Rippavilla, those are great things to put in the comments. And then if we need to catch up with you guys separately on that, we can. I think I want our consultants with Pillars Development to speak to the question that talks about how we define success. Because my simple view of it, they get into it in much more detail, is that success to I think our team is, one, having people be more exposed to Rippavilla, what happens at Rippavilla, utilizing that 100 acres more successfully to tell the story and bring people out for exposure and to experience that. But the other component that we're going to be looked to, I think, is how do we create something out there that is also a success from a financial standpoint? How do we help Rippavilla become more self-sustaining? And our consultants, if Ed or Brittany want to take this question, they are looking at alternate locations around the country that have similar situations to this, where you have a historic property, a historic home, and are looking for other places where there has been success. And so Brittany or Ed, if you want to take that question and answer that.
Yep, absolutely. So this is Ed. I believe it's a great question, you know, in terms of defining success. That's where you want to start with everything. And I believe, and I know it's not up on the slides now, but Josh showed it fairly early on, just talking about the distinct cultural contributions. Again, you know, Rippavilla in the historic context is what's really guiding us as we think about what do we see as success, and what are comparative institutions that are having success in telling their stories. And I think, yeah, exactly. Thank you for going to it, Josh. You know, unique architecture is something that we feel needs to be put on display. And the ways that those things are done and the way revenue is generated is by bringing events to Rippavilla, as well as bringing tourism-like activities. So things that can happen on a recurring basis to provide funds and revenue for programs that are more educational. So creating a programming, annual programming that transitions between those two things and does it almost seamlessly is a goal. When you think about also telling the story from the Civil War perspective and the history of the site, as was just stated, getting people not only inside of the mansion, but outside of the mansion, giving an explanation for the history and what will happen on those 98 acres in the future will be pivotal to that. We've got a couple of peer, what I'll call campuses or institutions and plantations that are taking their stories outside of the buildings. While the buildings are important, and yes, they house a lot of artifacts and they house a lot of events, the space around it is truly where you can engage people and tell stories. And that's something that's going to be important. The lives and the contributions of those enslaved, we've got several plantations to utilize as peer groups for analysis. And, you know, we've taken that to heart when we talk about telling those stories. I mean, the time and the place for doing that has always been at these historic locations where a lot of that history has happened, and it's not necessarily been preserved well in a lot of locations, but it is a very appropriate place for telling that story. And I feel like Rippavilla has 98 acres of which they can tell these stories in a lot of different ways. And then finally, the last one, when we talk about placing a focus on the agricultural history, one of the things that I think success looks like is a diversification of revenue streams. You know, we talked a lot about the events in the venue, as well as bringing people, but also looking for grant dollars and other funding that is focused on archaeological exploration, educational exploration, agricultural focuses, as well as Rippavilla itself looking to grow. You know, we saw that there were areas on the campus that were highlighted and identified for potential expanding infrastructure, as well as building, putting together capital campaigns, which has been done successfully by a lot of other peer groups, creating more places for people to visit and enjoy, as well as more revenue producing places on the property, and really just almost amenitizing the property in a sense, because the greatest value comes when someone can come to Rippavilla and have an event there, as well as someone coming to Rippavilla and having a tour, as well as, you know, young children coming there and learning, as well as an active space for the community, and trying to be a place that captures a lot of energy and does that in a way that makes people feel more connected to their past as well as their community. And that's really what I would consider as success. Rippavilla has put cast a pretty wide net on success, but for us, that's where we're taking it. And in this visioning process, I think we have a pretty good recipe of trying to capture that.
There's a question. Alicia had a question about the time periods that we're looking at. And I think, Carolyn, I'm going to throw this one your direction. So I mentioned at the beginning, there were kind of those 4 periods of time that we were sort of told, we want to make sure we focus on this, that these are at least covered. I think as we have, especially Carolyn, who's been doing a lot of the research for us, have delved into this more, there's more to this story than maybe just those 4 periods of time. And so we're trying to think through some ways to, as we capture more of the story, which I'm going to let Carolyn talk about, and how we continue to let this story grow over time as you get more information. And I think that, Carolyn, if you want to take it from there.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. To add on to what Ed said, I think that it's really important that we expand the demographics, that we don't let Rippavilla be stuck in a historical, only viewing it in one time period. And so many people look at during the war and where it was in history. But I think it's really important that we bring new ages and folks into this story, where we look back at everything that's gone on there over the last century, and we look at the way that continues to look forward. So there's a tremendous amount to talk about. There's just the war, there's the social issues, the agricultural issues, and potentials that are still there. And then how Rippavilla has been a part of the history of Spring Hill. So I think that what we don't do is let this dear precious lady get caught in history, and we look at that as something that's evolving over the last century and continues to evolve into the future. The stories that are there and the things that have gone on there have changed history. And I think it's our opportunity to lay in everything that's gone on and how that impacted the future. So you look back and you had a civil war, and you had a compound and an estate that was run by horsepower. And now you look at it and how it's changed and where it sits in history. So I think it's really, really important how we capture where it was, but how that particular 98 acres now is a time capsule that continues to influence the future and be of importance.
We had somebody also was just asking, if you do want to actually talk instead of chat, go ahead and raise your hand. If you click the little hand by there, Josh can let you into the conversation. Because I think Hazel, you made a comment on the question and answer. So if you've got something, feel free to try to raise your hand and we can let you in. Because I don't actually see your question, Hazel. I just see that you have wanted to know if you could be a part of a conversation instead of just in chat format. A couple other things under the Q&A. We have Casey with City of Spring Hill has put us in touch with Gwen Evans, which I guess is related to that music event. We shared some emails today, and we are going to try to get together with Gwen to discuss that. We do agree the amphitheater right now, we feel it is also in a great location for concerts with that, the natural hill where people can sit. So those are things I think we are trying as we look at the master plan and how do we make those even more successful, and other locations that Pillar's looking at to say, what do you need to do without spending a ton of money to make things more successful, bring more people in.
And I'll just jump in. Hey, Hazel, I've given access to your mic, so if there's something.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that. First of all, thank you for putting this on this evening. I would really like to see more input from our citizens, certainly on this. I moved here from California, so I'm not a Tennessean. And like so many people, I really was just kind of taken back about the history of this area. I never moved here because of the history of this area, but I was pleasantly surprised as I would drive around town. I'd see these markers or plaques or different things. And as I got more and more involved in the city, I found that there is a rich history here that to me is still very lacking to be told. And I know a lot of people that have moved here from other parts of the country just absolutely have no idea how significant our historical, I guess, what would I say, footprint is for this area. When it comes to Rippavilla, along with the other plantations in the area, Ferguson Hall, Oak Lawn, all of the different ones in the area, that too is a real mystery to many people. Now, we live right here in a city with a jewel like that and don't even realize what we have. I think a part of that is, and I'm not trying to point any fingers at that things haven't been done correctly or not, but I think a part of that is that, first of all, our leadership and the citizens of this city need to come to a place to understand how absolutely important it is to do all that we can do to preserve that. I heard someone speaking earlier, I'm not sure who that was, but I don't agree that Rippavilla should be progressing as far as our future. I think Rippavilla is our past. It's a part of our beginning, and it's a part of history that should be celebrated, that gives us roots into who we have been and who we have become. And it's always important to be able to teach generation after generation those kinds of things. And here we are in a city that is split on 2 counties that has grown up in a matter of 20 years or so, where most cities have generations, decades of time as they grow. And we have some assets that are right here in our own community that are very, very important as to who we are. But saying all of that, I believe that certainly, someone also earlier said it's a recreational area. We are a society now that is moved by recreation. Just about everything is about recreation, entertainment and recreation. And I have personally put on some very large events here in our city and know the work with that, but I also know the signature that can leave in a community, and the benefits that are even beyond, certainly financially, but beyond in creating connectivity and a sense of place and a sense of pride of where we live. And I think that Rippavilla's has so many things. You guys listed them there. The gentleman, I believe his name was Ed. I really loved what Ed had to say. There are so many opportunities, but the right opportunities are what we're looking for here. And I believe that having several signature events a year, everything that's done at Rippavilla, in my personal opinion, should be around the history, around the education, around the fact that it is what it is. And we shouldn't try to make it to be something else. We should celebrate what it is and give people the opportunity to experience Rippavilla. And that comes primarily through events, attractions, buggy wagon rides or buggy rides that take people around the property to see it. The majority of the people, I would even be bold enough to say, that live in our city have never set foot at Rippavilla. And it's just astounding how beautiful it is inside and out. So, I have ideas. I will submit those ideas to you, but I just wanted to generally say that I believe that that certainly Rippavilla is situated and suited to bring something culturally to our community that has been sitting there all the time, but most people don't know about it. And I don't know of any other historical property that we have in our midst that's doing that as well. So I believe there's great opportunity here to celebrate Rippavilla for what it is and help our citizens to have the opportunity to also gravitate toward that and experience Rippavilla.
Mary, you're muted.
Sorry. One of the things we've talked about, and some of our team has experience with these sensitivities of being an institution where your goal is to preserve and tell that story and make the most of protecting that. But what we're trying to do is look at how do you balance getting people, like you said, a lot of people who live in Spring Hill and are in that area they really don't know what Rippavilla is. They haven't been to the property. So how do we create those opportunities for exposure to bring people out there? They may be like, I don't care about the Civil War. I don't, that old stuff, I don't like it. But maybe they're brought to the site for a different reason. And hopefully they get exposed to a story they didn't know something about. I know Carolyn, who came from the Country Music Hall of Fame, we had this discussion all the time. Country Music Hall of Fame, people would have weddings and events out there. They're like, I hate country music, but they loved the venue. And because once they came out, then they were exposed to it. So I think what we're looking for are those things that will draw people. And when they're there, they also have the opportunity to learn and be pulled into that story. And it's a balancing act of how you do that without compromising the history and the story. And so that's why we're trying to get ideas of what resonates with the community. And then our team's also going to evaluate what resonates with the goal we have for maintaining those things at Rippavilla that can't be replaced, that, we've got to hold on to those and put them in a position to have the resources to maintain that. So it's a tough thing, but I think if we just sit here and don't do anything, then it's going to, they're not going to have the resources. There was another comment about Rippavilla I don't have the exact comment, but running at a loss for the last 12 years. So what's the game plan on basically getting them to self-sustaining? And Ed and Brittany, I'm not sure we're there yet, but I don't know if there's anything you want to address related to that. But that's kind of, I guess, what we're trying to do is find those things that are going to be the best, I guess, the best additional things we can do, or the best things to hold on to that have been successful in the past, and how do we make them even better and more successful. I think there's been lots of conversation about people loving doing weddings out at Rippavilla, but you have to rent a tent, and that becomes an expense to the event person who's having their wedding or their event. And so would it make it much easier and more desirable for people to have a wedding or an event out there if there was a structure, maybe not in the house, that's potentially going to damage some of the artifacts and compromise the integrity of the mansion, but is there a way to create, do those events better at a lesser cost for Rippavilla, and more consistency for the people that are having those events? That to me seems like one that is almost a real easy one, like we've got to do something like that because those have been successful. But we're looking for those other things that we can do to put them in a position where for the least amount of cost, they can get the best return also on some of these things.
Yeah, and hey, this is it. I'd like to chime in again there. I think both to the question in the chat, but also to what I believe it was Hazel mentioned. I think there's something that's critical in this process when you think about sustainability for Rippavilla, and a lot of it comes with really truly creating an identity, and then a mission around that identity. And I feel like the key to sustainability is diversity of funding, regardless of what organization or entity you are. And one of the things that I've noticed about Rippavilla, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but part of what will be in our market assessment is we've looked back over the past 3 years of their financials. We haven't gone back as far as 12, but there's not a lot of diversity in funding outside of what comes in from events, and then of course what comes in as supplement from the city. But again, I mentioned grant dollars, as well as campaigns, private campaigns, whether it be for capital expenditures or programming initiatives. And those two things go hand in hand: the identity of an area, a plantation, or any type of venue, as well as its fundraising and revenue generation plan. And I believe that what Rippavilla can do to, one, strike that balance, as I believe Mary said it very eloquently, is that's exactly what it is. It's a balance. You don't get put in a place to overexpose, over damage the venue or anything like that by having too many events, or by having events that don't really align with what the identity of the campus is. If you actually have a diverse revenue stream, and if some of those revenues are even committed or dedicated for certain purposes, you build your budget around that, and you build your programming annually around that. And when you have a diversified revenue stream, you are able to align it with celebrating the architecture, celebrating the history, touching on what has happened as part of the Civil War, as well as slavery that took place there. I think, as I would say, another way of what Hazel was saying is creating Rippavilla as a beacon. Right now, it's not. There are people that drive past it, and there's 100 acres of opportunity that are driven past on a regular basis. I believe what our goal of our master plan is to show Rippavilla's potential, define what it can be in ways that it can be successful in the short term, and give something they can build on in the long term. I think changing the identity, in a sense, creating a brand that Rippavilla is part of this community. There is a lot of educational opportunities, and it's a place also to come and celebrate that, right? The work that's been done to this date has been to preserve that, as well as to create that experience with agriculture and with nature. And so that needs to be woven in there, and finding ways to match and align funding with those core values is really what the challenge will be. Regardless of what our master plan says, the challenge will be doing that and crafting an identity and a story, and putting forth the effort to have a team, whether it be the city, whether it be the staff, or whether it be concerned and engaged community members that find a way to create a funding structure that allows Rippavilla to stand on its own as that beacon for celebration of history, first and foremost. And from that, being creative and making sure there is something for everyone there, because it is a community asset. It's owned by the city, and what comes along with that are certain responsibilities to the community.
You're on mute, Josh. Just yell out the door.
Yes, sorry. Also seen Alicia's raised her hand. I gave you the ability to unmute yourself, so.
Thank you, Josh. It's Alicia. I hear us talking about Rippavilla as a destination, and I certainly believe that that's a part of a strategic plan for Rippavilla. I would also like to ask that the group consider that Rippavilla is intrinsically tied to Spring Hill and to the history of Spring Hill as a community, and I think Carolyn touched on this. Rippavilla, though, was 3 miles south of the city. old limits, not current limits. It's also south of Saturn Parkway, and there are people that travel Saturn Parkway every day and don't know that Rippavilla is, you know, a mile down the road. I think part of telling the story of Rippavilla is telling the story of the Chairs family, and knowing that we have 3 brothers, each of whom had homes, 2 within city limits and 1 without, Ferguson Hall, and I believe it was Utopia, where the Spring Hill Elementary is. Knowing that Nat Chairs was married to Susan Peters McKissick, whose father owned the brick house on Main Street that many, many people drive by every day, but tying it to the community so that it is a destination in and of itself, but it also tells the story of our city over the years. And that's part of why my earlier question in terms of the pre-1850 period was asked, because there was a lot happening in this little town and they were very much a part of it. Understand that I grew up not knowing that Rippavilla was Rippavilla. I grew up knowing that it was the Chairs place. That's all I knew. And then I knew there was another Chairs place. So the family piece of this and their involvement in our community, I think would help people tie in. It's not just a historic home that sits south of Saturn Parkway. It's also one that's connected to Old Town in the old downtown area. That's my comment.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very valid point. And I, you know, I think as Caroline was saying and Mary was saying, I think we'll always be open to what opportunities those other eras in time could present. You know, initially we're always going to focus on what was outlaid in our scope, but I think, you know, if there are good avenues to learn more about those, we would welcome it.
I do think, you know, one of the things our team has talked about, and our preservation consultant, Phil Thomason, is not on the call today. He couldn't make it, but we've had a lot of conversation about the structures that you have on the site. How do you utilize those? And if, basically, I'm going to get to our recommendation is probably that a lot of the story that is told about different structures on the site may happen in a common location, that there's kind of, I don't know if it's an interpretive center or a place where you can go and get a lot of the education piece. I could picture, you know, elementary school students, middle school students going there, you know, different groups to learn about things and, you know, and discuss things in more detail, but also have the capacity through technology to continue to add to this story, that it's not just, like you said, Alicia, it's not just the house, it's not just the event barn or different pieces on the property. There was a history a long time before the Chairs family even got to the property that you could go back to. And I think since we don't have all that information, and part of why we wanted to do these town halls is that we know there are people in town who have stories like this that can share with us and lead us in the right direction, that we can at least put that information in the master plan for Rippavilla in the city of recommendations. We're not going to probably go research everything, but we're going to put in there that the recommendation is that we keep the door open to add to the story, and that there may be some very compelling things that need to get verified or tracked down that are going to come out of what people in this community know that we don't know right now. And I think just talking about it is going to open that up a bit and hopefully make this story even richer and be able to tie more to Spring Hill, and not just be a solo piece, Rippavilla sitting next to Saturn Parkway. Do we have any other questions or comments? We've been on for about an hour now, so we don't want to keep you all too much longer. We really do encourage everybody to take the survey and give us more information. If you want us to follow up with you, if you've got some thoughts and ideas or people that we should speak to in the community that can give us a little bit more information, we encourage that, so we can really get the full story here and do what's best for Rippavilla and ultimately for the city too. Because as I think those questions about financial stuff, nobody likes paying taxes and other things. We want to put the Rippavilla in the position to be more self-sustaining and give a resource and something to the community that people are going to be excited about having something here that maybe people didn't realize was such an asset. I'll tell you, when our team, right after we were hired, we went out to the site on a beautiful April day, all with our masks and social distancing, and we walked the property, and there are just some beautiful parts to that property that I'm guessing a lot of people don't see, and you have to be sensitive to that to make sure things are protected. You've got some old cemeteries back there, but there's a lot of kind of probably untapped potential to that 100 acres out there. That it was a really enjoyable day just for our team to walk around and get to see the site. So, you know, I'm excited for the possibility for Spring Hill and for Rippavilla as we get through this master plan. So any other questions?
I'll also add in that I did get confirmation the link to the online survey has been posted to the city website, along with a PDF of all the slides from the presentation tonight. So those are both available if you feel compelled to go ahead and jump into the survey following this meeting. Definitely encourage that.
Paige is reminding me, we had one more comment that I kind of alluded to the comment that referred to taxes and also is there, I think somebody said, is there an exit plan for which Spring Hill turns over the property, that Spring Hill is not controlling the property anymore as a liability or an expense. And I think that will be part of the discussions we continue to have with Spring Hill and Rippavilla, and look at what activities we think are complementary to the site. And so I think in our master plan, that's something that we can evaluate is where does the city want us to be? Where does the city want Rippavilla to be in here? And what that goal is. So I don't think we have that answer yet on how to do that, but we will put that on our list of things to consider as we go forward.
Mary and Josh, may I say one thing in closing?
Yeah.
This is Carolyn Tate. I really appreciate the comments, Hazel and Alicia, both from somebody who has who didn't grow up in that culture, and then somebody who has grown up but hasn't quite seen the depth. So all your comments, everyone's comments about Rippavilla's place in their life and in the city are very, very important in how ultimately we tell that story. It's just incredibly interesting to me to see that this place that's been there and occupies this huge footprint and this important place in the history of the United States. How you see that. So everyone's comments, we just can't tell you how important that is. And we appreciate very much all your interest and your input.
Well said, Carolyn. On that, should we conclude? Still on mute, Josh.
I could, for the sake of those on the call and watching on our recording, just try to show you guys where on the city website you can find the page. So I think that will help be beneficial. So if you just go to the home page, and you can scroll down here to see the currently what's happening in Spring Hill. You click on that page, and then there's, you click on the city website link here. There is now a slide presentation that you can filter through on here from tonight's presentation. And I would expect here's the link to the surveys right here at the top right of that page. So I'm sure we'll be able to get more pushed out on the city's social media channels, as well as on the website to help with finding that. But just wanted to share that with you for those that were on here. So yeah, I think with that, we can go ahead and
I think that concludes it.
meeting.
Thank you, everybody. We look forward to hearing from you and others at our next town hall meeting in maybe about a month or so. I think we'll get that date out as soon as we know it.
Okay, thank you all. Good night.